Hey guys, it's Reese here. I'm just gonna go over my Theorist handout. It's gonna be quick, but I hope that you can get some takeaways from it. So yeah, this week was historicism or poetics, and I really enjoyed it. It was cool. So this week I chose Adrian Montrose for my Theorist, and he had a very interesting and extensive background. It seems that he's been a theorist who has implemented a lot of feedback and shaped the Renaissance poetics, English Renaissance theater, and New Historicism itself. He published his specific writing that I'm going over in 1989 in the New Historicism textbook, I believe. Or he had an excerpt within the text. He has a master's from the University of Toronto, completed his PhD in Southern California, and is now teaching at University of California, San Diego. And he received his bachelor's in English with a concentration of European history and literature from the City College of New York. He was born in London, England. He's pretty cool, in the 1950s. Wow, that's crazy. But he was raised here in America in New York City. So, fun facts. I actually learned that he's a self-taught photographer as well. He uses all of his photography, or majority of it, to implement into his courses and his specific discourse to show cultural and visual culture. So he likes to show his theory through visual aids, which I found to be very interesting and cool. A quote from one of his biographies stating his interpretation of why he uses photography was, he strongly believes that to experience the diversity of cultures and landscapes stimulates the mind and the spirit, and provides a multiplicity of contexts in which we can better grasp our own place in the world. It also says that Lewis works in a number of photographic genres, including street and cityscapes, art and architecture, and environmental portraits. But whatever the genre, most of his work is focused on the documentation and interpretation of culture. So that was pretty cool. And being that historicism involves a lot of talking about politics, culture, theory, and gender, and all types of things, I think that that's a pretty nifty way of trying to implement art. As we go through, you can see that there's publications on the handout that he's done that involve New Historicism and gender discourse within his writings. So I found that to be really neat. But specifically getting to the actual texts that I read in the actual essay, Professing the Renaissance, the Poetics and Politics of Culture. He begins the essay starting off and making sure that we understand what New Historicism is and how it's developed, and how over time it's changed within the decades that it was developed in. But one of the main things that he says push the action forward of New Historicism was a speech done by J. Hillis Miller in 1986 at a presidential address to the Modern Language Association. He basically quotes Miller in saying that literary study in the past few years has undergone a sudden, almost universal turn away from theory in the sense of an orientation towards language as such, and has made a corresponding turn towards history, culture, society, politics, institution, class, and gender conditions. The social context is the material base. Therefore, this Mr. Miller had an issue with the idea of people actually thinking more into depth about text rather than just looking at it for the language and the language behind it, I guess you could say. But Montrose's comeback to that was Miller's categorical opposition of reading to cultural critique, of theory to the discourse of history, culture, society, politics, institutions, class, and gender seems to me not only to oversimplify both sets of terms, but also to suppress their points of contact and compatibility. So I think in this, basically Montrose is trying to express that within reading and within theory and within history, culture, and whatever else that may be subject to being read or understood, it all connects in some way, shape, or form. And if you disregard the culture, the bias, the gender, or anything that's within the text, you're basically suppressing the idea of there actually being another meaning or a true meaning to the text. For example, you could use a diary, the diary of the Holocaust individuals. In that instant, you can definitely use those as a personal perspective of a historic moment in history, and therefore it allows you to see the personal connections and the personal bias that the individual is writing of or that they feel. But whereas it's still a bias, therefore it's not implementing the whole throughout history. And what he's trying to say here is that you can't get the full history without knowing everything that was behind the text in which it was written. So I know I struggled to get that out a little bit, but I really hope that helps you guys understand a little bit more about what Montrose's idea was of historicism in this specific essay.